Well, hello everyone, regardless of what time you're watching this. I know you're watching it live here, but if you're watching the recording, whatever time it happens to be, day or night, we've just been watching How to Fix a Broken Heart by Guy Winch. Um, Quite a radical thing, I thought. We have a panel of two today, so one or two of the audience might want to join us. We have Andre O'Neill and we have Bob Creagh. I will just introduce Andre first. She's the president of the MII and founder of Acon Resolutions. She's an accredited MII mediator, holds a master's in mediation and conflict intervention. She has specialist training in separating couples and child inclusive mediation, might be handy for today's discussion. Andrea is a certified synergy conflict management coach. She's also the MII lead for collaboration with the Irish Red Cross. We start off, Andrea, with the same question every month. Give us one thing that you took away from that video, and then we'll open it up once I've introduced Bob.
We need to define what heartbreak is.
Okay, you need to define what heartbreak is. And did you define it, or were you happy with Guy's explanations and pieces
I,
together?
I think what it is that it's different for everybody. And I think as mediators, that's one of the key things when we go into a room. When somebody tells us they're heartbroken or somebody tells us, they've this sense of loss or something, we need, or, even when somebody, I mean, as simple as says, they need respect or they need something else, we need to understand what that means for them. And then I think it's up to us then to kind of understand it in the room as the process goes on. So as I was listening to that piece around heartbreak and talking about heartbreak, is what does that mean for me? What does it mean for you, Scott? What does it mean for Bob? What does it mean to somebody else? Is it the same thing? Is it different? If we have two people in the room and one person says they're heartbroken, does that mean the same to the other person, or is their idea being heartbroken something different, or heartbreak something different? So I think, yeah, I mean, there was great research that he had research done. There was pieces of research, but a definition of what he means by heartbreak. He spoke about it in relation to love relationships and everything else. But is there another type of heartbreak? And if it is, what is
Well, leave that one hanging while I introduce the other panelists today. It's Bob Creagh, is an MII council member in charge of governance, or was. Following a career in corporate and project recovery roles, Bob Creagh now practices as a mediator and dispute negotiator. Bob is both CEDAR and MII accredited, has been assisting clients resolve contractual performance, technical disputes in the major program project management space for the last 20 years. He acts primarily in the commercial, workplace, family, and civil sectors with a focus on small and medium enterprises, family-owned businesses, partnerships, and individuals. Bob, you used to be in the army. Did you ever climb a hill and make love beneath the stars?
On the grounds of self-incrimination, I'm going to skate.
Well, what did you find on
So
the ground? Go on,
your,
give me
your
one thing.
question is, what is a broken heart? Well, I suppose, well, I've had a broken heart on more than one occasion. I have it in good authority. I have probably broken one or two hearts. So by definition, because of course the heart is a very strong muscle, and all of us on the call today have one. It's keeping us alive, and it's keeping us going. So this heart, so obviously we need to dig a bit deeper, the breaking of a heart. He hinted a number of times about identity, and I think we're going to come back to that a number of times. So yes, hearts can be broken. It's the price that we pay for love, um, in and out of the mediation room.
Okay, so obviously when you get a broken heart, you end up with conflict. So come back to you, Andre. This chap here, Guy Winch or Guy Winch, he mentioned that romantic love and the withdrawal of that is a bit like cold turkey for drug addicts, which isn't a metaphor I've ever used, okay, in mediation. Are there any kind of metaphors or analogies that you think in mediation might be useful without leading the parties? That's one of the difficulties we have in mediation, try not to lead them. So anything that you find handy when you've got people who are in a mess, shall we say?
Yeah. I suppose for me, I usually follow where the parties are. So if I have two parties in front of me and somebody's talking in metaphors, I will follow that metaphor because I'm following their visualization because that's where they are. So as mediators, we're meeting people where they are. I would be mindfully using metaphors in, so say, for example, if somebody says, it just feels like there's a brick wall between us. Okay. And it's just, I'm coming up against a brick wall the whole time. Now, that could be in a relationship or it could be in work. And so you might follow that up with a question like, so what would help you see over that wall? What would help that wall come down? What needs to happen for that wall to be pushed back? Okay. So that way you're following their metaphor. But if you're in a room with two people where one person is quite a visual person and using metaphors is really good, but then the other person maybe might necessarily use metaphors and might be very much black and white and a rational thinker, we can tie them up in knots if we use too many metaphors. So I think it's really important that we, again, as mediators in the room, we're there to support both parties that are in the room with us. And if, for one, it helps them move by following a metaphor, moving with that metaphor and asking questions in relation to that, well, that's what we do. But we also have to be mindful that the other person in the room, that might be confusing for them. If they, like, say, for example, if they're a black and white thinker, they might go, well, I'm lost. I'm lost. What do you mean push the wall back? Like, what are we talking about a wall for? What's this got to do with a wall? So I think, again, as a mediator, it's about really understanding the parties you have in front of you and being able to talk to both of them. So yes, metaphors are really helpful, especially if the person in front of you, that kind of understanding and exploration of their own thoughts works with metaphors. Yes, by all means, follow that metaphor and do it. And sometimes we might bring in our own, but I would just be very mindful of our own metaphors because is how we're thinking or is that how they're thinking? So I wouldn't, I suppose 9 times out of 10, I would follow their metaphor. But I'd also be very cautious of the other person in the room. Is that beneficial for them? And that's why we do so much work in pre-mediation. So if we've that pre-mediation work done, by the time we get the two parties into the room, we kind of know that ourselves. We have built up that knowledge to understand what helps them communicate better, what helps them explore some of their thought process and things like that.
Okay. Bob, what about you? You use any kind of tools or metaphors that might be handy in mediation to help explain things about how?
I think I'd certainly agree with Andrea that were metaphors. I love a good metaphor, and topped off with an analogy. They're great. But my word, do you get caught short sometimes when clients look at you in that sort of pitying way, as if to say, "What on earth is he talking about?" Um, Clients bring them along. Sometimes, of course, metaphors in relationships can be used as positives and negatives. And what you need to be alive to is that perhaps the recipient of this metaphor may have heard it one too many times. And metaphors can be used in a coercive way as well. But so I love them. They can be useful, but I do need to be careful with them, particularly given our Irish metaphors, both north and south. And we spoke last time out with in our panel last time with Ken and others about these we are divided by common languages, and of course one person's metaphor is another person's annoyance. So we do need to be careful. But just going back to my broken heart for a moment, like the grief, loss, and rupture that we come across in the mediation space, and I give it those three. There is loss and there is grief, and there's quite often rupture, and that we sometimes think can be one-sided, but of course it's always two-sided, or even there can be multiple sides to it. But for me, and I would quite often describe it, it's the loss of an anticipated future. And that's where the broken heart for me sits in every type of mediation. It doesn't have to be either separating couples or family or workplace or commercial. There's the loss of an anticipated future that's going to cause heartbreak or certainly heartache.
Yeah, so it's people have visions, if
Yeah.
you like, I suppose,
Yeah.
that they've got there, and those visions are dashed, they're broken. So whether you call it a heart, when we'd mentioned, Andre, about when we were chatting before this,
Mm.
is it really about identity, or is it about heartbreak? Is it about a particular muscle? And that, to some extent, is a metaphor itself, isn't it? The use of heart as the abiding space of love. But I would
Yeah,
imagine something in your
and I
head.
would often ask people when they discuss emotions, where do you feel it? Because sometimes people, are very clear about where they feel an emotion, and it might be in the, in their chest, or it might be in their stomach, or it might be, and generally like that, love is that sense of, when love is good, it might be that sense of fullness within ourselves, and maybe when there's fear, it might be in our stomach, or so different people feel it in different parts of their body, but generally that sense of love or broken love or broken or heartache or heartbreak is generally kind of we think of the chest area where our heart is, and is that because that's what makes us function? That's what keeps us going day in, day out. That's what keeps the blood, flowing around our body. And in that way is when somebody becomes an integral part of our life, whether that's within a family relationship, whether that's in a workplace relationship, they become our purpose, they become our reason. And is that what keeps us going? And like the heart, like when that's removed, or there's a fear of that being removed. And again, that kind of even ripples out more into the community that's surrounded in that family, the community that's surrounded in that workplace, and even in the commercial end that Bob would probably talk better to than I can. But even in the commercial end of it, there's that whole reputation piece, So does it go out to the reputation piece? Like, is it that sense of face, that sense of status, that sense of thing? So I think it is that sense of purpose, that sense of how it reflects on us, and what does that say about us? That somebody that we are in some way, um, you know, being rejected or not lovable or not good enough in a certain space, or might not have met a certain criteria, or mightn't have been able to get the contract across the line. So what does that say about us? And I think myself and Bob spoke about that earlier on. I know, Bob, you were going to say a bit more on it around the whole thing of identity, um, and how that impacts us getting through each day, what people think of us.
Okay, Bob, just do you want to come in there and just say anything extra around this whole area about the impact on, I suppose, a collective view, a paradigm that people would have of themselves and indeed the parties? Because in family mediation, you could have kiddies that are upset by the heartbreak because one of the parents has disappeared or whatever. In the workplace, yeah, somebody might leave, or the tight group might be broken up, or they stop getting the invites to the five-a-side football or whatever other activities happen after work, that type of stuff. These things have a big impact, and the loss isn't just about self; it's about a wider sense of self, I think. Maybe. Do you want to chat about that?
And it is got, I suppose, and thanks for the invitation to expand on that. I would refer to it as the whole ecosystem, because we are not islands, and both in commercial and in separating couples, there would quite often tend to be a more proactive party. So somebody would have decided to move, either first move or whatever, and one of our roles as a mediator is to be alive to that. So what's the motivation behind that? And then quite often you'd find that when the other party catches up, because by the time they're fully engaged in mediation, they either, if they haven't caught up, they're about to. And when they do catch up, then I tend to notice an energy in them. So they then head off to the races. And the other person who was hitherto the proactive person is kind of going, hang on a minute, I was in control here. I was driving this particular bus. So there's all those dynamics going on. And then I remember a couple of years ago, Andrea and I were having a conversation about reflective practice, and we were talking about who isn't in the room. And of course, in the heartbreak scenario, who isn't in the room? Quite often, there may be a substantial protagonist who's not in the room, or there may be family, friends, and others, and as you say, children, and in workplace or commercial, who are the decision makers, who were, and I shouldn't use this phrase, but who are the well poisoners, Who's the person who's not in the room who may be causing some of the conflict? So all of this heartbreak is very personally felt, but it's much, much wider. And it's always part of an ecosystem. Now, answering a question with a question, is it our job to chase that ecosystem or just to get enough of an understanding as is relevant to what's in front of us?
Yeah, I mean, in separating couples, you're not looking at putting things back together. You're making a reasonable separation. So
Yep.
there has to be some kind of, I suppose, recognition, if that's going to work, about the new the new reality.
Yeah.
So
I would quite often, and most of my parents would be fed up with Bob's triangle, and we talk about a new relationship, a future relationship, which is heavily boundaried, and it has the children at the top, mum bottom left and dad bottom right, and that is a new relationship that has to work for the benefit of the children going forward. But in order to move to that relationship, you have to leave the old one behind. And I would quite often use stark language like, well, the previous relationship is dead. It is no longer, it's now gone. And quite often using that sort of language in the room brings a reality to it. But you have to be careful because you're dealing most definitely with people's hearts and their
yeah.
identity and all the other things that we've discussed.
Is that coming to Andrew? Is that our job as mediators to point out the blooming obvious that that's gone now. That
Yeah.
toe rag over there's away, right? You're in this new reality. Bob's triangle. You're in Bob's triangle here. How do you do that again without taking sides? Because we're not allowed to take sides. And you made the point that they were there to look after the interests of both parties. So how might
I,
you do that?
I think, first of all, to remember that the process of mediation sets itself up in such a way that we start with the past. So we look at the past, we're moving into the present, and then we're future focused. Okay, so everybody going into that process, we have, as mediators, we're explaining the process, we're explaining the framework of the process, and we're explaining that where we're moving to is the future. And while we will kind of look at stuff that have happened in the past, we're not going to stay there. We're going to move forward and see how we can, now that seems very, very linear and very easy. And anybody who's mediating knows it's not as easy or straightforward as that. And sometimes people get stuck in the past because, again, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what lies ahead. And also to be mindful that we're potentially dealing with a trauma situation. This can be very traumatizing. And even in the workplace, like I've done workplace mediations where people have been very traumatized by what's happened. And we have to be mindful of that. And while we're not counselors or we're not therapists, we need to be trauma aware. We need to understand when trauma comes into the room and to allow the space for that. But to answer your question, Scott, I think one of the tools that we use as mediators is that we do reality checking. So we check the reality of situations. That's what we do. That's what we have the skill to do. And how do we do that? We do that by asking questions. And while maybe reality checking, might find itself mostly down when we go into option developing and developing of options, we also can do a little bit of reality checking as we go through. I mean, we might check, say, is that how that landed for you? Is that what that meant for you? Where we have, say, one person might have a perception or an assumption that this is what was meant by whatever the interaction was. And we might check then, with the other person around those assumptions. For anybody that's done Jerry O'Sullivan's questions, they will know the importance of testing assumptions and following people along that track. And so we do reality check. That's what we do. That's part of our role. And through that reality checking, when we eventually get to, that they get to an agreement, I mean, their agreement, I mean, remember, that's another piece that we're doing. We're empowering. So when we're brokenhearted or when we're feeling maybe traumatized or stressed or all those things, I know in the TED Talk we spoke about, or the guy spoke about, being the IQ not being the same. But
Mm.
also emotionally, it might be difficult to move forward. And so we have to take it at a pace. So timing is key. So where we have two people that maybe one is more ready than the other, do we need to slow the process down a small bit so the other person can catch up? Do we need to look at the timing? Is the timing right? So they're all the things that we can do. And then when we come to the stage where maybe the parties have come to agreements or started to looking at agreements or options developments, through kind of helping them explore, asking questions, we help them get more specific about what they want. We reality check those things again. And when we do that, we remove the fear, because when we have a sense of certainty, we remove a certain element of fear. And through the whole self-determination process, what you would hope is that the parties begin to feel empowered in some way and feel that they have, Bob spoke about control, about one person moving on, and then suddenly the other person catches up, and there's a sense that, oh God, I no longer have control. But when, two people come together and they're designing their agreement at the end of the day, they have shared control. And that's where the timing catches up. So I do think we've a lot of tools we can use. Did that answer the question, Bob or Scott, or did I go off a little bit on you?
Well, that's okay. You're allowed to go off here. That's all right. That's the whole point. This is a kind of ebb and flow.
Yeah, yeah,
Follow your heart, Andrea. Follow
Yeah,
your heart.
just
yeah.
go what you have to
Follow my
do.
heart. Yeah.
Well, to talking about your heart will go on, Bob. The guy chatted about a Spotify playlist,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Which must have included Tony Braxton's "Unbreak My Heart," right? I'm thinking that. He then talked about, well, what's happening here is that somebody keeps going back and he talks about, we're great. I can't let go. I can't let go. And he seems really certain, didn't he? This is what
Mhm.
you've got to do. You've got to write down a list of all the nasty, horrible things this guy has done to you and remind yourself every time it starts playing one of those greatest hits and the times were good. Take it out and look at yourself and say, you're lucky to be away from, right? We can't do that in mediation. That would be that would have us struck off, I think. I think we'd be out the MII, I have to say, if we were to try that type of thing. But how do you get this sense of perspective? How do mediators help people realize that there's good and bad? What kind of questions might you ask in that situation? Can
I think today, because today is about heart, so two of the people dearest to my heart would be my mother and my partner. Um, so to pick up on that theme about the writing of lists, so my mother once advised me that if people upset you or whatever, then what you should do is you should write them all a really, really stern letter and then burn them. But now I don't know what to do with all those letters. So that's a joke, by the way. So therein lies the challenge. How do you exercise the broken heart? Now, I'm terrified by the concept of writing these lists because, and I'll tell you why I'm terrified, is that I'm really concerned that there might be quite a few lists out there with Bob written at the top of them. And I wouldn't like to read those lists. And I don't think any of us would. So absolutely 100%, no one in our profession, in our space, should be encouraging, because let's face it, as Andrea has said earlier, this leads to this and leads to this, and it will always lead to conflict. So putting fuel on that particular fire, I wouldn't. So again, answering your question, we facilitate and we empower. And in order to facilitate and empower in the context that we're talking today, I would see some of what he said as actually being pertinent, and that's about finding a new reason.
Mhm.
So encouraging our clients to find a new reason, a new focus, be willing to let go. I don't think that's in our wheelhouse. I don't think that's in our space. So, because what we need to provide is patience, compassion, and empathy. And if we bring those three in this particular spot, um, I'll come back to our four tenets later on, if I may. But yes, patience, compassion, and empathy. That'll help us. No bad lists or writing letters and burning people.
Okay, well, before I bring in Andre, I see that Sharon has sent in a little note here. Heartbreak is indeed different for everyone. the experience, length of time, the effect physically and mentally, breakup from romantic breakups, loss from loved one, death, distance, friendship, the list goes on. And I say completely different for each individual. As a mediator, we need to be patient with our clients as they not always get to the core or their heartbreak, slow down and go at a pace that works for everyone. Sharon, do you want to come in? Seeing as you're another council member, you'd have to be unmuted, I think, by Alison. But are you going to come in, Sharon?
Trying my best.
There you go, you're in. Back in the room.
I was about to send you yet another message. Yeah, I think the what my other message now is in relation to pre-mediation, because I sometimes feel that people are stuck when they come into mediation and they haven't actually and that's why I meant it the physical and the mental effect of heartbreak from wherever it comes from is real.
Yeah.
And it affects all of us in different ways. And some people can deal with it more or cope. Actually, not so much deal with it. It's the coping mechanism and how they they go through that piece of the loss. And it's very much, I suppose, pertinent in separation couples, but also, as you mentioned, the workplace. Huge pull on you there as well. So pre-mediation, and whether that's your private meetings, or sometimes what I find is working a lot, and that we do in Dublin Community Mediation, is we do a lot of work through conflict coaching to enable people to come to mediation more prepared to engage with the other person. And I personally believe that it does help them let go of a lot of the feelings that keeps them stuck. And as well as that, obviously, with that process, there's a small amount of reflection of where the other person is coming in from, and where they might have been in the conflict. So I think it's very important, particularly if you identify in the early stages of mediation that there are issues with one person more than the other, is that they can take up the pre-mediation in either the conflict coaching or a specialized coach separate from the mediation stage, just to help them, to bring them along. And I think that's vital for any mediation, not just for family separating couples. I think obviously, the commercial piece is another piece where, whether it's two friends that have set up a business and there's a loss of, the friendship as well as the business. So that's a double-edged sword. So yeah, very mindful of the pre-mediation and whether or not one might need more support than the other.
Okay. I can't remember. It's Andre. I'll come back to you now.
I'm listening to that, and I would agree with you, Sharon. I do think conflict coaching is brilliant for anybody that needs to kind of get prepared, that might necessarily be ready for mediation, but actually to help them get prepared. But I think one of the tools that we have, and it goes back to one of our most basic tools, is to actually listen. And if you think about somebody who's heartbroken and they've probably gone maybe, and be it about work or whatever else that might be, work, family, relationship, whatever that is, we go and we tell that we generally have the same circle of people, and we're telling them the story, and we're telling them the story. And, they may have a sense that they need to protect us, or they need to be on our side. They need to join our army. They need to back us up. So they come in and they're giving us support in that way. As mediators, when somebody comes in and talks to us, to actually just allow that space and not have an opinion, to not have a comment, to not take sides, and just to actually listen, and just to say, God, yeah, I hear you. And I can hear that was really difficult for you. And I can also hear that's been a massive loss. you know, do you want to tell me a bit more about that? But even just to allow that space for them to say that, I think helps with that moving forward. Because generally when our families or our friends or somebody comes to us, we want to protect them, we want to mind them, we want to say, we're on your side, you're not going through this on your own, we're there to protect you. But actually, for a lot of people, they just want to be heard. They just want to know that somebody understands it. And it might be somebody saying that, so what you're saying is that you still love them. And often when separating couples come in, you might have one person who has, for them the relationship is finished and the other person mightn't be, but actually nobody gets that they still love them. So just to even acknowledge that you've heard that and you've listened can actually allow them that space to go, okay, so somebody else in the world knows my truth. And
Okay.
that person has no influence on my life or my decisions. And that can be quite a powerful tool, even though it's the most basic tool we learn when we go into mediation.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things where I'd like throughout my life in dispute resolution, people have said it's the first time I've been heard or the first time anyone's bothered listening to me or whatever, and those frustrations come through. We don't then, Bob, go on and say, make a list of the horrible things and put them on your phone. So following on from what Andre's been chatting about there, and the importance, I think, of that Sharon also made, the real importance of pre-mediation to build the rapport and to show somebody, I've heard you, I really understand. I've asked all these challenging questions and daft laddie questions, trying to figure out where you're really coming from. What else might you do to help somebody who's in that situation there, and maybe where they're, I don't know, maybe they're going through harmful, and Guy Winch's view, harmful behaviours of reliving the good bits.
Well, I think if we go right back, like we are addicted. Like we are addicted to love, to each other, to identities, to material wealth. There are addictions, and very much they're all at play. Um, but and we know they're there, and they're risky. But that's why we like them, because they're exciting. So we shouldn't be surprised that when the joy goes, that we find pain in equal measure. But much like we were chatting before we came on to the call, we need to know what hat we're wearing, what wheelhouse we're in, because many of us are mediators, conflict coaches, counselors, and of course in my space, bereavement counseling and support. So knowing where people are, so take bereavement counseling, providing in the moment emotional support by recognizing and validating. And that's universal. And that is most definitely in place. Like in pre-mediation, so in IAMS, when you're doing an individual assessment meeting, and providing a very coherent statement of what mediation is about and what they can expect, and taking a lot of their questions then, because the questions are where the gold dust is. When they're asking questions, what they're saying is, these are my insecurities, these are my fears, this is what I want to know. They don't tend to ask questions about process, they tend to ask questions that talk to their fears. So very useful. And again, in commercial, in preparing people in that 1 hour sessions that quite often is limited to, you can do a lot of work there. You can do a lot of psychoeducation informally, because you're trying to help them help themselves. But there's a fine line here. There's a fine line.
Okay. I noticed there's a question here, but I'm not quite sure, Barbara, if you want to come in. Codependency or attachment may be a cause, but how to not attach? I'm not entirely sure what aspect that is. I don't know if you want to come in or if somebody can come in there about that. Andrea, I don't know if you have you seen the question in the chat?
Oh, I'll have a look though. So I mean, if Barbara wants to answer
I'm
that,
sorry.
fine.
Just
Yeah,
very,
Barbara, yeah, well
Yeah.
done.
sorry, just very briefly, it just came into my mind that when, say, a couple is in mediation, that they may have spent years together depend, as you do in a relationship, you depend on each other for lots of things. You become attached to each other in the most complex ways. And this begins to untangle in a mediation, you know, how to deal with that. I haven't dealt with that. I'm a very new mediator and my experience is very limited. But that would be something I wouldn't yet be able to deal with. But I leave it to you. Thank
Okay,
you.
I think, Barbara, what if I'm correct in kind of your understanding is, you know, it's that complexity of where people become intertwined in their lives and nearly become like what. So somebody's job is to, you know, I don't know, somebody looks after the finances, somebody looks after something else, somebody looks after something else, and even within the kind of personal piece of their relationship, maybe even socially, they go out, one person is the one that creates, you know, organizes the nights out, and the other person is happy to go along, but actually when they're on their own, they wouldn't be comfortable doing that. And I think, as you know, as mediators, it's not our job to necessarily counsel people around how they detach or how to do that. But within the process itself, we're breaking it down into bite sizes. So if you're dealing, say, with a family situation, you're not going to go in and just deal with the whole lot altogether. So what you do is you go in and you'll have your, you know, you would have had your individual meetings, then you'll have your joint session and you'll allow them that space to kind of explore and discuss what's going on. And then you go into your topics list, or you go into the, you know, deciding kind of what are the things we need to discuss. And you deal with one thing at a time, and you're building up agreement. And as you're building up agreement, what you generally notice is that the people in front of you become more confident in what they're doing as they begin to make agreements, as they begin to communicate in a way that's not about conflict or breaking down, that's not about blame, that's actually about working together and moving forward. What generally happens is there's an empowerment that comes with that. And it doesn't mean it's not scary, and it doesn't mean it's not fearful, but there's a sense that actually we can possibly do this. So even at the start of the mediation, it's all falling apart and it's in different directions, and there's a fear of that pulling apart. What we're doing in the future focus part of mediation is we're breaking it down into bite sizes, and we're dealing with one thing at a time. So again, we're not overwhelming the clients of, okay, we're going to fix this in one session. If you're dealing with a couple that's separating, or if you're even dealing with a complex family situation that's not about separating, you're not going to do that in one session. You know, you're going to break that down and do it piece by piece, because if somebody's been in a relationship for 15 or 20 years, their way of being interconnected has happened over those 15 to 20 years. We as mediators do not have the power to redesign that way of moving forward parallel in a disconnected way. But what we can do is actually help them break them down. I'm thinking of, you know, years ago, for those who are as old as me, and you learned how to wire a plug, and you had the brown wire and the green wire and the red wire, wherever it is. And when you got them, you to untwist them and figure out which one went where. Well, I think as a mediator, what we're doing here, we are now going with an analogy or a metaphor. But what we're doing is, you know, we help them and we're with them as they're unwinding that, and we're asking the right questions to help them unwind it. But really, you know, at the end, they together decide, okay, the green wire is the earth wire that goes in there. So what has to be the key thing that we both agree on so we can move forward? It doesn't mean they'll have it all sorted at the end of maybe five, or if you're doing a separating couple, maybe 5 or 6 sessions. But what it means is that they have a good basis to move forward with. And it's their basis, it's not ours. I'm not sure, does that answer the question, Barbara? Sorry, you're muted.
No, she's nodding anyway.
Yeah, no, good.
Okay,
Okay.
good stuff. Well, we're
Thank
coming,
you.
we're coming, we're coming. Thanks very much, Andre, for basically describing my marriage. I don't think I've ever booked a flight, because why would I when Avril can do it? There's certain things that only need one person to have any knowledge. So long as you don't split up, and so long as I die first, I'll be fine. What I mean? But it's nice of you to set those things out. But you're absolutely right. Barbara's right. Those interconnections are many and various, and they change over time. And like anything that's in there, some of them become really embedded and are really difficult to separate. And others are, well, that's okay. I can put up with it, and it just makes logical sense.
And sometimes they're about children, so they are very
Yeah,
complex.
yeah,
And if one person has been the key parent, and I don't mean taking on the key parenting role because that's the way your family's designed,
yeah.
the other person mightn't have the confidence, or there might be fear about, I don't know whether they're allowed to walk around the shop by themselves. I
Yeah.
don't know that. So, the other person makes all those decisions. How will I know when it's right? Well, but we create the space for them to have that discussion,
Yeah.
and that's part of our reality check-in and what are our values as parents? How do we decide when they come to, 12 or 13, that their freedom, or that they're given a little bit more freedom? How are we going to make that decision? How are we going to work together? And that's all part of our process, but it's about breaking it down in bite size.
Okay. Look, we're coming quite near the end. Is there anything else, Bob, that you'd like I suppose, point out from this particular video, which is how to mend a broken heart and its relevance or irrelevance, shall we say, to mediation?
I want to mention my mum again because when I first looked at this subject and I thought, where can we play with this in mediation? And the Mediation Act and all that stuff that we learn and all that fancy book learning, and I can only ever remember it by saying the word VICS, VICS, voluntary, impartial, confidential, and self-determining. And the self-determination that Andreas just talked about is vitally important. But every time I say Vicks, I think about my mother rubbing Vicks on my chest and mending my little broken heart. So I'll probably leave you with that, which is, hearts are there to be broken. They can be mended. And the one thing that he talked about today was the voids. How do we fill the voids? And of course, part of our challenge in mediation is to try very subtly to let the clients come to the realization that they have also created voids, because to intertwine in any commercial, family, or marital relationship, you create voids elsewhere, such as you displace other friendships, you displace family, you displace activities. So to go back to wrap all of this up with Barbara's as well, is what's your attachment style? What voids did you create? What voids do you want to leave behind? What voids do you want to just ignore or fill with something else, without having a passive aggressive Spotify list or music list? Or indeed a checklist of all the things that were bad. So thank you.
Andre, last word to you, I suppose. Any final thoughts on how to fix a broken heart in mediation?
I don't think there's any way to avoid a broken heart. I think broken hearts are part of life. And I think in mediation, I don't think it's our job to fix a broken heart. I think it's our job to create a space for people to come before us and really just be with them where they're at, but also to be part of that process that moves them forward into the future, and give them that sense, or not that we don't give it to them, they give it to themselves. If we're giving, we're actually taking as mediators. It's up to them to actually really find that sense of empowerment for themselves. And what we're doing is we're managing the process. I think really what's fundamental as human beings is that need to connect. And any time that we probably sense or feel a broken heart or a broken heartache is when we're disconnected, is when we feel that are disconnected. Or going back to the plug analogy, since we're talking about analogies, that somebody's pulled out the plug, so if they've removed us from the connection, that's what's difficult. And maybe it's just kind of helping them navigate that in some way.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody else. Just looking here, Junior Campbell. I think you've just a very famous name there. You've just joined us from Jamaica. I think we'll have to look at the timescales, but you can watch these things back. They'll be on the MII website this week. I'm hoping, Alison, I'll have it up, the recording. And we will be back on the 29th of this month when we're going to be looking at another video Oops, it's coming up here. Yeah, what happened when we paired up thousands of strangers to talk politics is going to be the next one that we're going to be doing. In spring 2019, more than 17,000 Europeans from 33 countries signed up to have a political argument with a complete stranger. They were part of Europe Talks, a project that organises one-to-one conversations between people who disagree, sort of like Tinder for politics. Editor Jochen Wenger shares unexpected things that happened when people met up to talk and shows how face-to-face discussions could get a divided world to rethink itself. So that's on the 29th at 1 o'clock, and it's BST, British Summer Time, that we're on now. Just changed there at the weekend. I'm sure those conversations would be very different now. That's 2019. Talk about VUCA and Banny worlds that we're in. Things are very, very different, I'm sure, if you got 33,000 Europeans chatting today or even Americans chatting today. So that's it. So look, thank you, everybody. Thanks to Andre and Bob this week. We'll be back on the 29th. If we didn't get to your question, sorry. I see, Anne, you've got a question up there. We're going to stop recording, but we can still take your question anyway, if that's okay. And thank you very much, everyone. I'll see you next month.